We're all here, I guess, so we'll call a meeting to order. Any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, looking for a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
I have one comment on the minutes.
Go for it.
It says in the last paragraph of Article 5, after discussing the uses, it was decided that education facility and daycare facility should be included as a permitted use in all districts. I think the way we left this was that we were going to continue discussion, that maybe it was like a conditional use. I don't know if we ever end cap that. I don't feel like we did, but maybe others felt differently.
I'm sorry, where were you exactly?
So under the fifth,
Yep.
I don't know, what do we call these? Bullets? The last paragraph talks about the zoning district uses table that we discussed. And near the bottom, it talks about education facility and daycare facility. And the way that it's worded sounds like we were conclusive in permitting that use in all districts. But I think we wanted to continue that discussion to make sure that made sense on this call versus having like a conditional use for those.
I thought that we had decided that we would do educational and daycare and all. It was religious facilities we were going to.
That's what I recall too, actually.
Okay, because I kind of went and apologized profusely for going back on what I had originally suggested, which was to make it a permitted use, and thought that maybe making it a conditional use would allow more discussion from the neighbors before it was permitted. And my thinking was, it's not permitted at all. It's not even on the chart as a use in most of the districts that we're now saying that it's a permitted use. So we went from there's no option to put it in to now anybody can put it in anywhere. And I just thought it warranted further discussion that if we made it a conditional use, then the neighbors could get involved. If there were traffic concerns, there was a voice to be had. It wasn't just like a straight up permitted use. And so I apologize for going and revisiting it after we sort of like really quickly said it's permitted and moved on. But maybe I'm the only one that remembers that. And if you all think that it's a use that you're like, oh, if your neighbor moves out and they put a school in there, it's no big deal. We're all comfortable with that. Then it can stay that way. I just had concerns. We talked about it really quickly and then moved on. And I wasn't sure if like the conditional use was a better spot for that to sit.
So I remember you bringing that up, Abby. I don't think I can review the video, the recording to see if there was any consensus on that, but we still can talk about that again in the future. We're not obviously done talking about the use tables, so we can revisit that if that's something you want to talk about at a future meeting. Yeah,
I mean, we said we were going to revisit it at this meeting, but I'm kind of looking at you guys to see if you want to revisit it or not, because I can't tell. Is everybody comfortable with it being a permitted use in all zoning districts?
I guess I would like to revisit it.
Yeah, I would too, actually. I remember sort of that I thought that we said it was a permitted use in all zones, but now that you're bringing it up again, I guess I would like to have further discussion about it.
I recall also I asked about daycare and I thought daycare we decided it would be allowed in all zones as a permitted use because of the I think the mayor brought up the question or the idea of difficulty in finding or having daycare facilities, adequate daycare facilities. And Christine, tell me if I'm misquoting what you said.
You're not. I did.
Okay. Yeah, I remember you called me on the carpet on that.
Yeah, and I was definitely, aligned with Christine on that too. But this category does include K through college, right? It's like it's a very diverse category. So we haven't separated like daycare, yes, in every district, but college, no, or like, K-12, no. So I was going to pull up, and maybe Eric has it handy, that matrix that we were all looking at that kind of showed our current uses and what's permitted in what zoning area. Just to remind everybody that right now educational facilities are only permitted, I think it was like in the commercial zoning use, and we were talking about permitting it in all the uses.
Your
that
use table, Abby?
Yeah. Do you have that handy?
Yep.
Could I just interject here that this item is not on the agenda, right? We're looking at minutes. If you want to revisit it, that's
Right.
fine, but we shouldn't like start diving into that right now.
So do we need to change the minutes to reflect that it's
Well-
not? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say, Christine is right. We can get into further deep dive in it when we get back into this agenda item. But for the minutes, maybe what we do is Eric, you were going to review the tape to see.
I can do that.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just have you do that. A question was raised about this part of the minutes. And so we should probably then table approval of the minutes until we find out. We can approve them at the next meeting once we get clarification on that. Does that work for everyone?
Yes, fine.
Just my general recollection of it was that we did have a really rigorous discussion of the subject, and we were all pretty open to changes for like it being approved throughout the zoning districts. But my general understanding of it was that we kind of had it in mind that we were going to be revisiting that and coming to a really more conclusive stance. It was more kind of whether we were kind of feeling out whether we were open to doing this. And I think we all, by and large, were.
Okay. So we'll just table the minutes until the next meeting till we get clarification, if that's all right with everyone. And we'll move on to the next agenda item.
So the next item on the agenda is the discussion of the master plan goal progress, and I will turn it over to Mayor Lott to lead this discussion.
Thanks, Eric. So last winter, we were talking about getting all the commissions together to check in on master plan progress in the spring, which of course was thwarted. So in absence of that effort, each commission is taking a meeting to look at the goals for the section of the plan that they are associated with. So for us here, this is land use. To just check in with the goals and see if we feel like initiatives over the last year or two are aligned, if there is somewhere that we're really off track, and what our priorities should be for the near future. So the way we approached this at the Finance Commission the other night was just to kind of go down the list of goals. So we have 8 here for land use, and just have a discussion about like, what is it that we're doing to meet this goal, or is there something we're missing? And then I'll ask you a few questions at the end to sort of summarize where you all think we are and where we should be headed. You all have or do you want to put the goals up, Eric? Oh, and I should say the outcome of this will be, the council will look at all of these together from all the commissions. We're going to try to do this alongside the budget process, sort of as like a big picture of where we're at as a city moving forward, and then also share that back with commission, so you all can see like the overall where are we across the board.
Okay.
So we have, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, you're in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first goal we have here is about infill and building upward in accordance with regulations to ensure economic sustainability. So I think that's what our form-based code and gateway development is aligned to. Are there other initiatives that folks see supporting this goal or places where we're missing it?
I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, I think the only place that it's zoned for and to me makes sense is the gateway and the downtown.
Mhm.
And I think that our regulations address that adequately.
And it also seems like there's a fair bit of construction going on in those areas as well. So it seems like it's working.
I agree.
I guess the only thing is when you talk about build upward, I think we limit height to some maximum 6 stories in the downtown, in some cases, or a height. I mean, I don't know as we want to go any higher than that. That would be the only other thing. And I think at this point, my feeling is that we're fine the way it's written now. Basically, I think in the gateway, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, you can go up to 4 stories.
With a bonus 5, I think.
So the gateway it's a story limitation and a overall height limitation, depending on where you are, either north of the railroad tracks or south of the railroad tracks. But with the bonus story option, it's a maximum of either 5.5 stories, or I believe it's 65 feet, or 4.5 stories and 58 feet.
Just can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
While it seems relevant, is that like consistent with other patterns throughout Chittenden County? Is that like generally a similar?
Those building heights?
Scale, size, yeah.
I mean, I think it depends on the municipality. For example, in Burlington, they allow for, I would say, probably at least twice that, depending on where you are in their downtown core versus, or I guess around the Church Street area and their kind of downtown versus other parts of the city. I believe South Burlington is somewhere similar to that with some of the new development they've done in their form-based code as well. So I would say it's not inconsistent.
Okay, that was my general impression. I just wanted to know if that you had any more insight into it.
And look at what's happened. That I think that is still the tallest building in the state. The elderly housing down on Pine Street or St. Paul Street.
Decker Towers, yeah.
Yeah.
Currently, yes.
And then 2 Burlington Square, not 2 Burlington Square. The building, 7 Burlington Square, I guess it is, the 10-story building. And then after that, I mean, I think 4 to 6 is typical. Well, 3 to 6 is more typical of what's being built and or is allowed. Although I guess the proposal for the new
City Place or whatever?
city.
Tower of Babel.
Yeah. So I think Christine, that on number 1, I think we're in good shape. We've met the goals.
Great. So for number 2, continued development and support for the downtown core. So we are still supporting the VEIC hotel project, which would complete build out downtown. Little COVID delayed, but still moving forward slowly. And I think this is maybe not a land use issue, but support of downtown Winooski to support our business community down there is kind of supports this as well.
That's pretty historic, actually. Once that gets built, that be like the final keystone there. Long time of planning and work on downtown.
20 years.
Yeah. Well, if you go back to like model cities, it's like 50 years like working on that.
Yeah. So Christine, there still are 2 other lots that are potentially developable down there. The question is, will anything ever happen on them?
Yeah.
And should that be changed?
So they don't have to be, financially speaking,
Yeah.
But what's his name? Winooski Hotel Group guy there.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean.
Adam Dubroff.
Yes. Still does have land rights there.
I thought he
action on that.
he didn't swap those for the parcel that's being proposed now.
No,
I thought he was the one that started with that hotel proposal, and it got taken over by Nettie and those guys.
he never completed the land swap, right, Eric? Like that never went through?
I believe that's correct. There was discussion about swapping with lot 7D and also potentially swapping with lot 8, but the land swaps never materialized.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if the hotel does develop on 7D, I can't imagine he would move forward with the hotel on, well, I'll call it the West Pad site. I'm not sure what the number is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is. So we're focused on development of this last lot, making the whole TIF financial situation whole, completing the vision for downtown. I think then the next step would be focusing on what do we do about those 2 lots and what the long-term situation is there.
Yeah.
I mean, he owns it. He's going to want to do something with it, right?
Or sell it? I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that like, as far as if we're talking about like goals and values here, is that like something that the city really wants to see is something on that spot?
I don't think so.
Okay, that would be my.
He owns the land though, right? So there would have to be some effort made to prevent.
Okay.
To keep it open.
Right.
There is also a development agreement from 2006, which gives him some, which does allow him some concessions from the city to develop that lot if he so chooses in certain ways. So it kind of outlines some of those components that the city will support the development on, mostly related to access and things of that nature. But he is the property owner and does have the right to develop it.
As I recall, part of that was also the city would consider or let them expand that lot from, I forget if it's 80 by 80 or 80 by 100, but give them a little bit more land around it. I know when the hotel was initially proposed, that was one of the things that happened. Was it was a very tight site, so we said, okay, we'll allow you to expand it by like 20 feet or something. I forget specifically, but there was something to do with that and parking spaces in the garage. But that was 14 years ago. Now that's a done deal. There's a new chief in town.
That's right, Mike.
That's right. And I'll blame all that on Clem because he was mayor at the time. So
good to know. So number 3 is to transform the gateway districts using public and private investment, specifically trying to capitalize on some public investment into infrastructure, stabilize and strengthen mixed-use commercial areas, create pedestrian-friendly multimodal district, expand housing, ensure a complementary relationship between corridors and surrounding neighborhoods, and better utilize existing resources to develop underutilized lots and create an improved pedestrian experience. I think Main Street obviously is set to achieve kind of all of these. We also completed the East Allen scoping study, which could have that gateway meeting these goals when we get to the point of being able to fund that project.
When you're talking about corridors,
yes.
what does that mean? Is it just like the
districts? So,
just
Main Street,
okay.
East Allen, Malice Bay Avenue. And what was the other point I wanted to make on that? Oh, I mean, we got some private investment to pay for the crosswalk on East Allen that is currently there. So those are some efforts that are working towards this. Obviously, there's still more to happen here.
Yeah, in terms of our role, I think that the form-based code in these gateway districts are set up to achieve all these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of, when it all happens. And like you said, we're seeing it on Main Street. We're starting to see it on East Allen Street. Mounts Bay Avenue, I think we've always known is going to be the last corridor to really get redeveloped or achieve some of these things, because there are some physical problems there with topography and whatnot. But I mean, I think that zoning is set up to allow us to meet this goal.
Folks agree with that?
I do agree with that. The things that we have yet to achieve with some of the multimodal, pedestrian friendly or bike friendly, I mean, it doesn't say bike there, but being one of our goals, are things that we're set up for in our planning to allow that to happen over time as the resources become available and the opportunity becomes available.
Yep.
I'm curious where the whole, like parking on the corridors and affecting the neighborhoods, where that, I guess I'm just wondering, because it seems like there's a conflict there amongst some of us. I don't know if it's a complementary relationship as it is currently moving forward. It seems like we're just getting more parking in these corridors. So I don't know, that would just be one issue.
Yeah, I noticed that too, Amy, when I was reading this. Number 3 and number 5 kind of don't seem like they're compatible necessarily.
I think I think they could be compatible. I think that it's just a matter of us being aware of, especially the parking thing and the infiltration into neighborhoods, because this clearly talks about preserving neighborhoods. That's something that we have to deal with. And I think that our regulations currently, again, I think our regulations are such that it allows these two to coexist, but we have to be careful about going forward, if we when we look at parking requirements and whatnot, to keep that in mind, of that conflict between the gateway and infringing in the neighborhoods.
Right, I see what you're saying. Because currently, as it stands, it's okay, but if we change it, it might conflict, or we need to be cognizant of that.
Right.
Okay.
Could I ask a question here on number 3.f? What is better utilize existing resources? What does existing resources mean there? That sounds a little broad, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around it for my own knowledge.
Having not written these myself, the way that I interpreted that is that
Taxpayer dollars.
What's that?
Taxpayer dollars. I mean, those are the city resources, budgets, taxpayer dollars towards projects, right?
Well, so I think like an example is Main Street. We already own curb. We're trying to like bring in the curbs, right, to expand the sidewalk and use those better develop those underutilized lots. So that's not like, that's an existing resource of the city, is that public right of way that we are trying to leverage to change that experience in that corridor.
Okay.
Interpretation.
I just have a question. I noticed that it's total, I guess off topic, but somebody in the chat keeps asking, is that allowed?
I don't know who that is.
I don't know who that is. So I'm just curious about that.
It doesn't look like there's any weird participants in the meeting, but
that's been taken care of. Thank you for asking about that. Just a casual Zoom bombing. Please continue.
Thanks, Paul. So not to be too presumptuous, but I actually was kind of assuming that goal number 4 here about refining the land use regulations, like that is something that we have been doing in this commission, and that this would likely be one of the priorities going forward, because we've been having these discussions trying to address parking and the complementary nature between the corridors and neighborhoods.
Makes sense.
Fair assessment.
I would agree. Although I would love to see more about stormwater too. So I think 4 is a good one to highlight.
One of the questions I would have is, why would stormwater management be part of our work? I'm just a little confused as to what we can do in planning to do something with stormwater management.
Eric, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the aspects of stormwater management that we would be looking at potentially is our impervious coverage limitations and potential green space requirements or landscaping requirements and things of that nature to help allow for stormwater to be managed on site rather than have to be conveyed off site through another system. So those components could come into the land use side of things.
That makes sense.
More directly.
I do remember that now. Thank you.
Sorry,
I do think that's important, because I know many other cities require it, but we don't.
I just wanted to say something quick about number 3. On E, the complementary relationship between the corridors and the neighborhoods. I know we've talked a couple of times about like adjacent, how the zoning, the way it's set up in the Gateway District affects property on the gateways, but then the property next to the Gateway District. Sorry, can you hear me okay? The one next to the Gateway District, there was a conversation about whether the developer could
Split
buy
zoning?
that. Yeah, the split zoning conversation. I'm not sure if we ever as a planning commission really talk through that, but I think that E would really directly relate to that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, Eric, that's still in the list of items. Yeah.
Yeah, we have that queued up for a future discussion as we're reviewing the regulations.
Okay.
Maybe the important part in this one is that we have those discussions, that there's a forum for those discussions as it relates to these goals, so that we're not ignoring the potential for impact to the neighbors.
So Abby, before we get any further, who's the newest member of our planning commission?
So this is Kai. Kai, say hi. Look this way. Yeah.
Hi, Kai.
Dad is missing in action. He must be doing something outside. So we're going to babysit Kai for a couple of minutes till he comes back in.
No problem. We like having future planning commission members.
He needs to represent his age group.
You have anything to say about daycare? No. Do we need more? Yeah.
I had brought up earlier when we were talking about a little bit of elaboration on number 3 with F there, I guess, because the way I read that, that's kind of where I interpret that, like, you know, we have talked about historic preservation and managing historic assets in the city. And that's kind of why I read better utilize existing resources.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like, because my observation is a little bit of the tactic that's being used right now is clear the lot and put new in rather than kind of integrating existing things that are worth saving into new development. And I just kind of think that's where our objective in having the inventory that's being produced, I think actually dovetails pretty good in with that point, if I'm interpreting that correctly.
I think that's a good fit, Joe. What is it? Adaptive reuse? Is that the right phrase?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
And how could we, as the Planning Commission or the city, encourage adaptive reuse?
Well, hopefully the people doing the study for us tell us that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and once we get that study done, we can then thoroughly address the whole historic preservation question and put in language that we feel is appropriate and has teeth that can, as opposed to what happened to us getting caught with our guard down, if you will, on some of these things, thinking that the state was going to protect us and finding out not so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just bring it up here because I think that line really clearly illustrates well, like a good balance. Because I think sometimes the misconception is that historic preservation is either things stay exactly the way that they are, and you can't change anything, and anti-development, and that's not really the attitude. It's kind of like, well, how do you work with what you have that's worth saving?
So there's something, and I don't know, again, Mayor, put me in check if you don't want to go down this road. But I was looking at the master plan recently. And if you go to the Winooski Housing Needs Assessment, and there was a project done by CDAE in July of 2016. And the very first line there, it says key findings. And it says, Winooski has a large share of subsidized housing units and needs to invest in existing housing as opposed to being focused on creating new affordable housing. The city would be well served to put its resources towards preservation and rehabilitation of existing housing to improve the quality of the units. So it's kind of taking us another trail, but the only reason I brought it up here was to say, that wording is, and the affordable housing is another storyline. We don't need to get into that for the moment, but just it is that preservation is said again and again in the master plan in different ways. And I think we do, I know we're headed towards that. I'm just backing up what Joe's saying is that resources the communities said that they want those to be considered resources as well. So I'm just putting that in there.
I think it's interesting. Go ahead, Christine. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I will share that there is, some of the work that the Housing Commission has focused on it's been aligned to that, a little bit more focused on quality, but improving quality of existing housing. And there are also some side conversations happening among staff, but you're right that we haven't, that's not something we've really gotten into here at this level.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say that 3F is a good illustration of a line that can be interpreted many ways.
Yeah.
What are existing resources?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Didn't you write this, Mike?
I love the banter, by the way.
That's it. It's all Clem.
Yeah, everything is either Clem did it or maybe Billy Norfolk did it before Clem. I don't know.
Yeah.
Somebody is thrown to the bus.
Throw someone under the bus.
Right.
What's that?
It wasn't you.
I won't say that.
It was all of us.
It may have been me. Who knows?
But he will take credit for the better points.
Yeah. Like the plumber who complains about the one before him.
Yeah, that's right. No, I say that in jest. I will take all the blame if it needs to be given someplace, because I was in the middle of all this stuff.
It's a lot of work, Mike.
But something like this, do we want to go in and clarify, or do we just leave it as is and let people interpret it as is?
Well, so this is from the master plan,
right?
So that will get addressed when we're ready to update the master plan. I think.
And also the master plan has a lot more detail. We're just only looking at these goal summaries at the moment.
Yeah. The master plan I'm proud of that. And when I look at it, I really think it's a great document. And I just kind of, what I'm always in the back of my head is how are we actually executing what we idealize there?
Mhm.
It goes back to what we sort of were forming our group when the new mayor, Christine, came on, was that are we meeting the goals of what the master plan, what the community asked to have,
Mhm.
So speaking of that, how do we feel about number 5?
Move us along.
Yeah, move us along. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've been dealing with it. We've been trying to address that.
Yeah.
I think there are things that we have to keep looking at, but we are looking at it.
So number 6 is allowing neighborhood scale retail and, oh, that's right. There's a second page.
There's a lot.
Allowing neighborhood scale retail and services. Do we feel like the zoning is meeting that need? I know Eric recently proposed changes that were similar, that align to this.
Yeah, that was another topic of discussion on the last meeting. We approved some new uses in some of the residential areas. But yeah, that integration of neighborhood scale services.
I don't feel like besides that, we haven't really talked about that, have we?
Yeah, I think we're just starting that conversation.
I think last meeting we kind of dug into it.
I will tell you that there was a lot of conversation about this when we did these zoning regulations. Tommy, you'll remember this, I'm assuming.
I do.
Yeah. That was a very big consideration, is allowing smallish commercial neighborhood type uses within the residential districts.
And it was clearly to meet that neighborhood's needs was what we were looking for. So that, for example, one of the small grocery stores like there's only one that I can think of right now that's in a neighborhood, but it's meeting the needs of that neighborhood, and we wanted to allow that to continue. And the same would be true if we were looking at services for the daycare setting, to allow that to exist within a neighborhood.
I'm just curious, Tommy, which one you're talking about? Which grocery store?
What's the one? I don't know the name of it. It's and I get my streets all confused.
Talking about Chicks?
Yeah, I am. Yes.
Okay.
Chicks Market?
Yeah.
Part of meeting the neighborhood.
Well, I mean,
and I went to a grocery store. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, well, I've never been in there, to tell you the truth, but
Not a grocery store.
yeah. So what do I know? But
Maybe not your close neighbor.
no, not my neighborhood.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah,
I
but
think-
having something in the neighborhood that would support. So I'll take
Right.
that back.
But we clearly, when we rewrote the zoning, we talked about things like, neighborhood grocery stores, like service uses like hair salons or barbershops, or, whatever else you might think of, but just, small commercial.
I do think my general impression is that a lot of Winooski neighborhoods have lost some of their vibrancy in the absence of this stuff that it historically did have. And I think that when zoning was initially enacted, it kind of wiped out a lot of that. And I think that was part of the impetus for changing some of the zoning to allow that more. And I would kind of like to foster that. But I think it's key that it has to be neighborhood scale, because that's why people are getting a little bit apprehensive when they hear about this kind of development in neighborhood, because they want to make sure that it is something that really fits the needs there and will be harmonious rather than an obstruction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would say it's a great goal to try to get that in, but then you've got to deal with the realities of the financial, world. And would something like that make a go in the neighborhoods? And that's where the entrepreneur has to make that decision.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, over the past 20 or 30 years, 40 years, there's been a move away from neighborhood stuff to, big supermarkets and, those kind of things.
Exactly. And like even is it Sammy's Market that's down on Malachi Avenue?
Yeah.
Like in my lifetime, that has changed ownership so many times. And I think it's partly due to the fact that it doesn't have gas pumps. And so otherwise, if you don't have that kind of steady major income source, it makes a small enterprise being, kind of a struggle.
I think if we also look at some of the ethnic markets that have popped up in the neighborhoods, that actually some of those I would consider to be grocery stores.
Oh, definitely.
So I think if we look at those, then, and those are also neighborhood scale and they're serving the neighborhood. So
exactly. That's what we should be encouraging, I think, with number 7. Yeah.
And currently, I found our zoning table. There's nothing permitted. No retail uses permitted currently in our residentially zoned neighborhoods, except for a couple conditional uses. So I imagine when we start digging into that, we can talk a little bit more if there should be other. Right now, we have 2 residential zones that have conditional uses for retail sales, and then 3 for little cafes and restaurants. But everything else is blocked off right now. So I think when we have that conversation, we could directly link it back to meeting this goal and how to meet it because I don't think our current table does.
So Abby, is that the table we were discussing on the last meeting that you're referencing again? Okay, so I feel like we've started this conversation actually.
We started it for sure.
Yeah.
I think this is probably our newest bit that we're chewing on.
Yeah.
So number 7 is to maintain and evolve commercial industrial districts to retain and grow businesses and enable startups. I don't have any fast examples for this. I mean, we have supported our existing businesses and retained them, and we have some growth.
The CBD plant.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I'm not sure if there's if this is something that zoning needs. I'm not sure if we need to address zoning on this, right? Like we have the zoning in place to support those businesses right now.
Right.
Where Heather shines.
Exactly. This is really more her bag.
Let me provide just a little bit of history on this one.
Yeah.
Is that for the startup and the tech businesses, one of the things that we were thinking at the time that we wanted to do this was having the pop-up kind of office spaces that small businesses could share, and having some of our commercial zones be able and zoned so that would be possible to have those shared office spaces.
So I think that is happening right now.
The Champlain Mill's definitely doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's allowed. I mean, I'm not sure you can get so precise as to allow shared use, but you can, you've got office uses are allowed. And so if someone has an office use that's shared, I think it still meets the definition of office use.
Yeah, we're not preventing it.
And that's what we were really trying to see if we could actually even encourage to have a low impact business be part of our commercial and industrial districts.
Yeah, and then to the I think the larger question, the districts themselves, I don't know where we have an area that we can expand either commercial districts or industrial districts. The only possible industrial district expansion would be the Gilbrook, and that would not go over well if that was proposed. I can tell you that right now.
I guess I don't read this as expansion. Maintain and evolve. To me, it reads like the existing.
But I'm just saying we don't have the space anyway that we could expand to allow greater development, if you will, of industrial or commercial uses.
Couldn't you go up near the school? Isn't there more space up in that area that could there's all those parking lots that could be expanded? I feel like.
The school owns it all. Yeah.
Across,
So if the school closes for some reason, or if they want to sell some land, then it's possible that could be rezoned. But I think that's now zoned public. And I don't know if if folks were around to recall, 10 or 15 years ago, there was a proposal. Someone proposed putting a pharmacy, I think it was, where the soccer field is in the front of the high school.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a kind of a big debate.
Yes.
And I mean, it was not favored. So I can't foresee that
I guess,
happening, because it was talk about selling that lot. And I don't know how they would make the expansion that's going on right now feasible if they had sold that.
Right.
I guess I wasn't thinking that close to the school. I was thinking up near like Repo Graphics off Weaver.
Oh, Tygan?
Yeah.
That's all industrial.
Right, but it's maintained commercial and industrial districts. So I just didn't know. I feel like there's room to grow there, isn't there?
Yeah, depending on those businesses' needs.
Yeah.
I think in my lifetime, it did slightly grow, because they're right where it turns to go to Main Street. That did not used to be an industrial. I mean, it was probably zoned industrial, but that was not developed from what I remember. And so they actually added some more industrial space in there.
And there actually is some vacant land down behind Biotech running between there and Orchard Terrace.
Yeah, that has kind of some weird stormwater runoff things going on too, which might be why it hasn't been developed.
Yeah, there's a stormwater pond back there.
Yeah.
I know.
We're wandering here.
Sorry.
They call us the wanderers.
Crack the whip.
Okay, so number 8, review zoning to maximize opportunities for the recreational economy. I think this is something that hasn't happened, but the council just approved the Parks and Open Space Plan at their last meeting. And so I think that's a discussion that can come now that plan is in place.
Good.
So number 9 is to consider expansion of the neighborhood development area designation. I don't have a lot of detail of this. I know I've heard Heather talk about it. Eric, is there anything you want to share?
So this is, I mean, really, I think the impetus of including this in the master plan goals was more because of some of the
Funding?
So funding being one of the items, but also some of the relief that's granted to the neighborhood development areas from the Act 250 process, because we have a really robust local review and planning and zoning and development program already. It seems a bit redundant. So I think this was a way to potentially allow for some of that relief from having to go through the local process, but then also go through the state process. So there's a question about whether or not we would qualify to make the whole city a neighborhood development area, but because of our geography being as small as it is, there was the thought that it might happen. So it might be preempted with some of the legislative discussions on Act 250 reform. So this was, I think, also a way to get at that same concept.
Eric, do we currently have any neighborhood development area designation in the city?
We do, yeah. All 3 of the gateways are in the ND right now.
But the downtown has got a different designation.
Correct. It's part of the downtown designation.
Right. So that wouldn't need any expansion of this neighborhood development area would exclude the downtown because it's already got its designation?
That's correct. It would be, the downtown designation is its own program and has its own set of requirements and benefits. The NDAs are a separate state program that has their own benefits and program requirements.
I find this to be kind of an odd objective here, to be honest, because like the neighborhood development area already covers so much of our small city that expanding it to be like the whole city seems a little excessive.
Well, and it may also fly in the face of keeping the neighborhood residential neighborhoods. You know what I mean? We've had that discussion.
Yeah, I think it also has implications as well in what we're talking about. It's going to be number 10 as far as, because I know that was part of the reason why a lot of the buildings that are in our gateway corridors that are on the state historic register are threatened because the NDP kind of gets them off the hook from more rigorous scrutiny as far as historic resources.
So the neighborhoods themselves, the areas that are zoned for residential wouldn't be really impacted by the NDA designation because the underlying zoning would dictate what could be built there or how those areas could be developed. I think what would be beneficial though are some of the tax programs and some of the other benefits that the NDA, the state program offers for those designated areas. So that's, I think, part of the reason why this was explored for making the whole city an NDA.
Seems to me like we should probably at some point down the road have a discussion about what the neighborhood development area is, what it means, all that stuff, so we more understand what it is.
So it's not a priority is what I'm hearing, though. We can just disregard this goal for the time being.
Yes.
10 and 11, I think both of these, the historic preservation that we are in the process of trying to create are really the initiatives we have working towards these right now, which would directly go into updating the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So in number 12, I'm curious, did the open space master plan address all these issues identified?
Yeah, so
like wildlife habitat and water quality protection and those things?
Yeah, there's recommendations in there about, conservation for our natural areas. What's the word I want? Like boardwalks or whatever to protect from erosion. There's stuff in there about flood attenuation. I don't know about carbon sequestration.
Right.
The human enjoyment. Did you add anything, Eric? I don't know how detailed you got into the parks plan.
I've read it multiple times in various iterations, but I don't have anything else to add at this point.
Would that kind of relate to like the Main Street redevelopment plan and like the East Allen Street scoping? Because if we're talking about, I know there was a lot of discussion about tree canopy and trying to foster that.
That's
and
true.
Partly why I think where we were talking about adjusting some of the build to line setbacks was because so we could have like better tree canopy in those areas in the city, which would promote carbon sequestration.
That's a very good point.
So in a way, we have, I guess, made some progress.
Well, and water quality protection, I think that ties into the stormwater regulations.
And also stormwater. I mean, could that deal with the flood attenuation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Joe put us a little bit into number 13 about promoting vegetative landscaping and new development. I think our setback discussions also get at that.
Yeah.
There's some duplication here.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think 12, 13, and 14 are all pretty tied together.
And kind of 15 as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's river corridor, but it's all, yeah. And 16 is, when I read it, it was like, let's talk about it, but we don't need to because there's no agricultural things in Winooski.
So if I were to go back to summarize this, so the specific questions put forth are, Have past and current initiatives been aligned to policy goals? I'm hearing for sure, yes. Are current efforts supporting multiple goals? Yes. For priorities, I think it's continuing these discussions about zoning and making sure that we're having that complementary relationship with the neighborhoods. Maybe lower priority, but later discussion is the commercial uses in neighborhoods. Are there other priority? Oh, and then continuing with historic preservation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there other priorities that I missed for like the next 2 years?
I think this might be part of the parks master plan, but we did talk about getting a clear, if my understanding is correct, a clearer view of what could be permitted for in like the Cassavant area. This was like a while ago that we talked about this. Is this making sense to anyone?
Yes.
So that there are recommendations on that in that open space plan, and it's something that would have to come back to this group to discuss. So I'll add that to the priorities as well.
Yeah, I think open space is particularly important now, also because of COVID.
Yeah.
People need to get outside more. And
I was just thinking that might be like in the upcoming year, something that ends up coming up in conversation.
Yeah. And also, Christine, if I'm wondering in the historic preservation part of this, I think, I don't know how other people feel about this, but I think maybe some wording that is more about repurposing or has repurposing in there as opposed to, that gold standard, tie a ribbon around it and don't touch it. Because I think there's a lot of excitement in repurposing historic buildings, and it may be a easier pill to swallow a little bit for redevelopment.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be as draconian as other municipalities. It's just kind of giving localized control as to saying what is worth saving.
Yeah, and you don't have to save it for what it has been, but it can be something new.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's going to be this group's role when the consultant brings forth, here are ways to approach this, policy ways.
Okay.
For you all to make sure that is the trajectory we take.
Yeah.
The disappointing thing to me was seeing in the goals of the master plan so much attention paid to historic preservation, that whole thing, and getting smacked in the face with these projects that came along that old homes or old historic structure has been ripped down basically.
Yeah, that's been painful.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad that there was. It doesn't seem like there was any weight given to this document that we're looking at now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but to make you feel a bit better, Mike, I've talked to a lot of people in historic preservations, and it says sometimes that you just need the sacrificial lamb to get the community to say, "Hey, wait a minute." Are we paying attention? So we need to pay attention to Stevens, for example. So anyway, we're getting off track, Mayor. Sorry.
Because Eric has an agenda item 2 tonight.
Okay.
So just 2 more questions. So one quickly, do we feel like we are on track towards meeting these goals over the next 7 years?
Yes.
Nice. Yeah.
Didn't hear anything alarming. I think we're not sure about goal number 9. We're not the neighborhood planning, so that's super low priority. And I think there's a couple of other items in here that the open space plan tees us up for. So the zoning for Cassavant, for example. So we haven't made progress towards those goals, but we have just started. We are now in a position to do that. The majority of the goals we have made some progress towards.
I'm going to also throw in when we redid zoning, however many years ago it was now, one of the things we kicked down the road was the zoning question in Cassavant as well as Gilbrook, having a larger conversation about Gilbrook.
Yeah, so those are both in the open space plan to come back to us. And then my last question would be, as a commission, do you feel like you have what you need to succeed and keep making forward progress here?
We need higher pay. Oh, that's off the table. I'm sorry.
So one thing, and I don't know, again, just stop me and we'll put it somewhere else if this is an appropriate comment. There's a sort of gut feeling that I'm having about watching the new development, and a lot of it is housing, and it still seems like a lot of the commercial part of what's going up is sort of an afterthought. And, you know, we're going to have a lot of people living here in a lot of these big buildings, and are we creating that walkable, not walkable, that's the wrong word, but is enough of the commercial stuff viable and going to really make it feel like a Church Street or, or a Pine Street even at this point? Or, does anybody else have any?
Yeah, are we working more towards like an integrated community, or are we promoting more of a pattern of bedroom, like bedroom community?
Yeah, that's a good way. It's just a sort of, it's what I feel like we're seeing going up, and that the commercial space under it is sort of a little chunk of a bottom of a big building. And is there a way to be watching out for that and making sure that's the right direction? And
Well said.
I'll have to think on the phrasing of this, but there's something here about the long-term bigger picture, and if we have the information we need to envision that, are we discussing the right thing? Something around there.
Yeah, if others agree with that feeling.
I do.
Okay.
I would agree, and I think being that Winooski is already so densely populated, that's such an important value, I think. And if we really want to reduce, automobile use and have multimodal transportation, we really have to be looking at that as well.
Yeah.
And really the intention of the form-based code was to have these districts have what I understood was commercial retail on the bottom floor and residential units above. So that's not happening, and I think warrants further examination of the code, because it seems like they're building what they have to build, which could be a very small piece of the first floor footprint.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's even Winooski's fault. I think that just promoting that kind of entrepreneurship that would bring that is kind of a challenge for, everywhere in like the US right now. It's basically trying to make small businesses viable.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is, in the current world, it's much more profitable to put in residential than commercial.
Yeah.
And so you're fighting with that dynamic as well. So
it also, philosophically, it also might say to you, maybe we need to pay more attention, which we are doing, to our parks and our open public space, if we're not going to gain that commercial stuff, just because the market doesn't support it in a way. So that we end up with a place that feels like everybody's, if you're all living in densely populated apartments, you want to be able to go out and feel as if you have parks around you that are
Usable.
Yeah, and accessible.
And within a distance of your home that you can just walk to.
A 10-minute walk.
Yeah.
I think
And
that's
we are
so
doing
wonderful
that.
actually about Winooski, is that you can walk to several parks within your home. I just think it needs to be promoted, and accessibility needs to be provided.
There's a statistic we have that it's a high volume of percentage of landmass of the city actually is park space. And I think that our parks master plan is really going to help kind of maximize their impact. And it is wonderful that we have a city where there's these kind of like little natural pockets where you can kind of escape. I don't know.
Yeah, I put the Parks Master Plan in the chat if folks have haven't seen that yet. But I will say the scale of the buildings that have been going up recently have been quite large. So it's not necessarily a tea shop we're talking about. I mean, you could have like a significantly large business or office, taking up a bottom floor of these units. So it's not like the morning light space is so tiny. It makes it really hard to have a viable business in there. But we actually use the entire ground floor of some of these new developments that have gone up on East Allen. I think you would provide an opportunity for someone not only to be able to live here, but to work here, especially if it was like an office space.
Yep. So.
Well, I really hope that this was helpful for everyone as a moment to like reflect on the work that you all are supporting. And these summaries of the entire where we are at with master plan will be coming back to you in a future meeting.
I think this was very helpful, Christine.
Yeah,
Thank you.
too.
Just to keep us focused on the master plan, because it's easy to kind of lose track of it sometimes.
Yes, there's a lot of content there.
Yeah. And it's nice to, as I went through this and as we talked tonight, it's encouraging. I think that we're doing a pretty good job of staying on track with the master plan and hitting the goals.
Yeah, I'm pleased with this discussion. I will hand it back then to you, Mike.
To me.
Yeah, to move us to the next item.
There you go. Thanks, Christine. And you're going to hang around, right? So.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I've got to find my agenda again. Are we just moving to pick up the discussion from the last time, Eric?
So
I can't find my agenda. That's why
I thought we have a whole new thing, I thought.
The next item is to continue our review of the land development regulations, but instead of picking up where we left off, I was going to move us a little further along, mostly because last month, I believe, or the month before, some new legislation was passed that would impact our regulations, mostly because our regulations are not currently consistent with that legislation. So what I wanted to do was maybe move us up to that discussion on accessory dwelling units to look at what changes the state made and how that's going to impact our regulations, and talk about the changes that we can make in our regulations to potentially move through that piece quickly, so that we could make sure that we're consistent with state statute. With that said, because our regulations are not consistent with statute currently, anything that comes in would be reviewed against statute. So the fact that we are not consistent doesn't mean that we can continue to review under our regulations. The statutory changes will preempt what we have currently in our code. So I wanted to revisit this, or to move along to the accessory dwelling unit section, so that we can, like I said, hopefully make some changes, or at least review the changes, and be able to get this potentially off to a public hearing so that we can get this done. So that's why I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it will relate to what we were talking about at the last meeting and tie back to that as well. So it's kind of it's related to the land use table in the sense that it is a land use, but we're looking at specific detail of that use. So included with your agenda, I provided a memo of the kind of what we're looking at and why we're looking at this. Draft language for our regulations, particularly section 5.1 that is related to accessory dwelling units. I also provided our Article 9, which is our definition section, where we also define accessory dwelling units, and then the actual bill language that was adopted, or that was passed by the governor, or signed by the governor, Act 179 as it's called. So what I wanted to do is just kind of walk you through the changes that will be required based on Act 179, and then a few changes that I am proposing, to have discussion on those elements as well, because like I said, those will impact the use table. But I think it will, personally, I think it'll help strengthen some of the regulations, but there could be some good discussion involved here. So with having said all that, I just want to remind everybody what time it is so that if we start getting too deep, we can, maybe put a pause on things and come back to it. Because like I said, state statute will trump whatever our regulations have in them now anyway. So we don't have to force this through quickly. So basically what state statute did when Act 179 was passed, it focused on several items, one being accessory dwelling units. And what it does now is it primarily increased the size of an accessory dwelling unit, whether that be attached to the primary unit or as a detached structure. So the previous regulations, as we had in our ordinance, was that the accessory dwelling could be up to 30% of the primary dwelling. Statute was changed to be either 30% or 900 square feet, whichever is greater. So that's one aspect that we need to change. And another part of that is that the statute removed the language that we had in our ordinance, in our regulations about it being an efficiency or a one bedroom. That's been struck in as well. So it can be as big as it wants. It can have as many bedrooms or as large of a living area as possible, or as could be designed, as long as it stays within those dimensional thresholds of either 30% or 900 square feet, whichever is greater.
So it's a little bit like a form-based code approach, where it's just kind of like you have this space and you can do with it what you want for residential purposes.
Kind of, yeah.
The owner doesn't have to live on the site in order to have it, though, right? Or is that?
So that's a piece that I'm proposing. So it is still, state statute does still require the owner occupancy. That is something that I want to discuss about potentially removing from the language, from our regulations. We currently do have that included as well. So as you can see on the screen here that I'm sharing, the first section here on the efficiency in one bedroom is part of Act 179, which is why I've proposed to delete that. And also, they changed the language to say a distinct unit. So that's where that change comes in. The second item here is that it's either, and we already have this language, it's more just a rewording of it, specifically that it's either located within within the single family dwelling unit or appurtenant to it. So either attached or detached. The owner occupancy piece, I do want to have a discussion on that, but I want to put a pin in that for right now, just to get through the rest of the changes here. The next change, again, per the act, is adding the 900 square feet, whichever is greater.
Eric, question.
Yep.
Question on that. So, if you've got a house that's 1,500 square feet.
Yep.
Okay. If the accessory dwelling unit is put within the house, can you feet or does it, within the existing structure, or does that fall on setbacks and all that stuff?
You just froze up on me there, Mike. I didn't catch what you were saying.
So can you expand on your existing residence? Or does it have to be within what is there?
I believe you can expand the existing residence.
Okay.
As well.
But then it would be subject to setbacks and all that, lot
Correct.
coverage, all that stuff. Okay.
Yep. Which is where the next couple of lines come into play. So item 3 here, so this is really, it seems like it's a reiteration of the definition that it's the property be developed with a single unit dwelling at the time of the application. So I guess to take one step back, an accessory dwelling unit is permitted by right by state statute anywhere that there is a single unit home. So if it's already developed with a 2-unit structure on the property, then it's not permitted by right. So only where there is a single unit dwelling can you by right have an accessory dwelling? So, which is included as part of the definition. But so what I wanted to do was add this item number 3 more in to make it clear that just because there is a single unit dwelling doesn't mean that you automatically get an accessory dwelling. And this is more related to a planned unit development. So with a planned unit development, you will have multiple, or you could have multiple single unit dwellings on the same property. So this line here, I wanted to add to clarify that there can only be one single unit dwelling on the property at the time the application is made, so that a planned unit development with 4 single units on it couldn't have 4 additional
accessory
on it. Yeah. So it seems like it's a little redundant, but that's the clarifying piece for that item.
Erica, wordsmithing, I'm just wondering if it would make more sense to say, instead of saying with only a single family, with only one single unit.
Yes.
So some smart lawyer doesn't come and say, there is a single unit dwelling.
Yep.
There's 2 a single family dwellings.
Right. Yeah. I can get on board with that.
Yeah.
Part B here is really more just a rewording of what was number 3, I believe, previously, where it's basically saying that it's still, even though it's by right, it still requires a zoning permit. We're still going to review for setbacks. We're still going to review for lot coverage. We're still going to make sure you have adequate parking. So the use itself is permitted by right, but you still need to, you can't just throw one in wherever you want because it's a use by right. So this is really just a reiteration of what we previously had in our regulations related to kind of the dimensional standards and overall lot configuration to make sure that that's still intact. So then item C in this starts to get into if it's larger than 30% or 900 square feet and makes it a conditional use. And similar
as a duplex.
Basically as a 2 unit, right. So this is where, so this ties into these next 2, C and D, tie into the kind of the owner occupancy question that I want to discuss. Because right now, as it's written, and as state statute provides, the property has to be owner occupied. That could either be the accessory unit or the primary unit. The owner of the property has to live there. I'm proposing we take the owner occupancy piece out for several reasons. One, because it's hard to regulate the owner occupancy. It's kind of it presumes, I think it presumes that just because the owner lives on the property, that it will somehow be better cared for, or the attitude of the behavior of the people living there will be better controlled. And I don't know if there's a direct correlation between owner occupancy and any of those things. The other part of it is we don't define what an owner is. So we would need to add definitions for what an owner is. We would also need to add definitions for what occupancy means and kind of how those 2 things correlate. And then I think we would also need to add language in here that talks about what happens if the owner does not live there. So if somebody already has an accessory dwelling unit that's been established and they sell it to somebody else and the owner does not live there, then we have to have language in here that says what needs to happen for them to basically remove that accessory dwelling. So you'd basically be buying a property that has an accessory dwelling with it. You, in essence, need to remove that accessory dwelling if you are not going to live there as the owner. So there's some components that need to be discussed and thought about with what owner occupancy is going to end up requiring.
I think I asked this actually at like a meeting not long ago, and Mayor Lott brought up that that's a difficult thing to regulate as to whether, and there, like you said, there is an assumption that if there's an owner living on site that's going to receive better attention. And that's kind of why we favor that. And I'm assuming why the statute favored that and put it in the language.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's an unfair assumption. I mean, being next to somebody who just built a giant detached cottage in her tiny backyard, overlooking my tiny backyard, her plan is to fully Airbnb it. And I think probably fair assumption is that she's going to be more responsive as the owner living in the front to make sure people in the Airbnb are acting appropriately because she's my neighbor and I can walk over and say something and I have a relationship with her. So I don't know if that's I don't think that's an unfair assumption.
I agree.
So
I totally agree. Just seeing all the rentals in my neighborhood and the houses that used to be owner occupied that now are just rentals and duplexes are permitted here, and people just don't take care of them. There's garbage all over the place. There's even around the corner on Hickok Street, same thing. People that don't own them, there's garbage left everywhere. There's furniture and crap on the side of the road. I don't think it's an unfair assumption either.
Eric, because it's almost 8:00, can we kind of skip over this and pick it up at the next meeting or further down the road to talk about this owner occupancy thing? Because I think this conversation could go on for quite a while.
Yeah. And we can all just think about it ourselves and then present maybe logically when we talk about it again, or, not logically, but
hopefully logically.
I was going to say non-emotionally.
Illogically, yes.
Without emotion.
Yes. Well, we know that ain't happening.
I also had a question that I think it was probably on our list, Eric. I think you had said that, but I don't fully understand how a detached cottage and an ADU are different currently, like how they're in our standards. Can you explain how those are different?
The primary difference is that we allow for a detached cottage to be larger than we do for an accessory dwelling. And we also allow them where there is not a single unit developed.
Like duplex.
If there's a 2-unit building, correct. Primarily in our residential C zoning district, we allow up to 3 units total per lot, but we do not allow multifamily. So the only way to achieve that is to have a 2-unit and then a detached third unit, because an accessory dwelling would not be permitted where there's a 2-unit already, because it has to be a single unit. Mm-hmm. Only allowed where there's a single unit.
So if someone was planning to build an accessory building not attached to their primary residence, why would they ever do an ADU? Like why wouldn't they always just go under as a detached cottage? Well,
so it would be the same thing. So if an accessory dwelling unit that's not attached to the house is always going to be a detached cottage, but a detached cottage is not always going to be an accessory dwelling unit.
Did you say that owner occupied needs to happen with a detached cottage?
Not with a detached cottage.
So that's what's the difference at the moment.
No, we don't have that in our zoning language. It's
right.
This is what state statute is proposing to make this a universal.
But so it's an ADU.
We currently require owner occupancy for an ADU.
Right.
For a detached cottage, we do not.
So, but you said a detached cottage is always an ADU, but an ADU is not always a detached cottage. Isn't that what you just said?
Correct.
So then if a detached cottage is always an ADU.
No, I think you got it backwards, Abby.
So
an accessory dwelling unit, a detached cottage is not always an accessory dwelling unit.
But an accessory dwelling unit is always a detached cottage. Yeah, I'm confused now.
If Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understood is a detached cottage can be an accessory dwelling unit on a existing single unit property. but it's not a accessory dwelling unit on a property that has a 2-family unit already on it. So if it's the third unit, it's not accessory dwelling unit.
Okay, but if it's the second unit, it's always an ADU.
Or if the property is not owner occupied. If it's
over 900 square feet as well.
If it's a single unit that's a rental, it would be a detached cottage. Quite frankly, it's a nuance of the regulations that I would like to clarify, quite frankly.
Please.
And part of what I'm alluding to with items C and D in this new draft is to try to get at that so that we can eliminate the detached cottage language, and everything is an accessory dwelling unit. It's just a matter of how big it is. And if it falls within the thresholds of the 30% or 900 square feet, it would be permitted by right. But if it's larger than that, it would be a conditional use. It would still be an accessory dwelling. It would just be a different review process, and basically eliminate this component of a detached cottage, because it's always an accessory dwelling. It's just a matter of how it gets regulated.
So Eric, you're saying that ADUs in the zoning districts that they are allowed in currently, we do require it to be an owner-occupied unit?
That is correct. For it to qualify as an accessory dwelling.
Okay. So how do we approach?
Let me say a few more words there, Joe. For it to qualify as an accessory dwelling unit that can be as a permitted use.
Okay.
Can you explain that?
So right now our regulations have section 5.1, which talk about how an accessory dwelling unit is regulated. And this is generally consistent with what state statute said. So state statute has always, or not always, but for a time, statute has always said that an accessory dwelling unit is a permitted use by right with certain caveats. One being owner occupancy, one being the size limitations, that it's, has adequate water, wastewater, all of those things. So that's what we have carried forward. So in order to qualify right now to have an accessory dwelling unit go through as a use that's permitted by right, it needs to meet those standards. So there's a size limitation, the property has to be owner occupied, and it can only be a single unit dwelling on the property when the application is made. If it's larger than the size requirements, or if it's not owner occupied, or if there's more than a single unit on the property, it goes through as a detached cottage.
Okay.
And that process is not by right, but by what? Review?
Conditional use.
Conditional use.
So if we have that for ADUs now, that we can, how are we enforcing that now then, if you're saying that we can't, as far as verifying if it's an owner occupied unit?
Well, generally, for example, we would, making the application would verify or provide some confirmation that they live at the property, but that doesn't necessarily then carry forward. We don't require them to put a deed restriction on it or anything like that. And I'm not really sure what legality we have to do that, if we can legally require somebody to do that.
Sure. Yeah. Because when we talked about this briefly before, because we kind of touched on this issue of how would you verify that, and you have to have like a homestead declaration. So couldn't they just be verified through that?
Right.
Either that or where the tax bill gets sent, because obviously if you don't live there, you're not going to have the tax bill sent there.
Potentially.
I think a computer could see that.
I was actually talking with somebody today who their tax bill, they gave me a copy of their tax bill. It's sent to an address in Winooski where there is a single unit that's rented, and there is a cottage on the property as well that's rented, and they don't live there, but the tax bill goes there.
And that's why homestead declaration would
be most accurate.
The other part of that then is too, if we're, yes, we can, I mean, theoretically, we can track that type of information, but then if we find out that somebody is not living in a property, then we have to have them basically remove the accessory dwelling to make it no longer a dwellable space. So basically, they would have to, the main way to do that is to remove the kitchen and make it no longer a place where you can prepare your meals independently, which then jeopardizes potentially somebody that's renting it. We get into those types of issues with fair housing and, in essence, throwing somebody out of their house or where they're renting. So, I mean, there's...
But we're not talking about that kind of enforcement, though, because, like, we're not doing that now.
Well, but that's what we would have to... I mean, that's what we would be doing, in essence. If the owner is not living there, then they can't have an accessory dwelling that's permitted in this manner.
But they could have a detached cottage.
If it went through a conditional use process, yes. However, to expand on that, Abby, also right now, if they have an accessory dwelling that's attached to the house and they live there and they sell it to somebody who's not going to live there as the owner, and it's in the RA zoning district, it would have to be eliminated altogether because we do not currently permit 2-unit development in the RA district. We only allow for single-unit dwellings. So they would have to eliminate the cottage, the accessory dwelling altogether.
In the RA district?
The RA, we only permit single unit. We allow for an accessory dwelling, but if it's attached to the house and the owner doesn't live there, then they would have to remove that accessory dwelling or basically make it uninhabitable from the context of separate living space. Because we permit a 2-unit, don't permit 2-unit structures currently in the RA district.
But sorry, I'm in the RA district.
You're in the RB.
Oh, I'm in the RB?
Yep.
Sorry, Terry, go ahead.
It's okay. Sorry, I was interrupting you. So it sounds like if I'm hearing this correctly, it sounds like you just want to eliminate this because it's going to be easier to maintain this way. And I'm going to argue the other side of that and say that don't we want to preserve our neighborhoods and don't we want to encourage owner-occupied homes in our community? Do we want more rental properties in Winooski? Do we want to have more of that, or do we want to have more people that are invested in this community and that are going to be here and that are going to, and like I said, everybody's saying it's an assumption that people that don't own their homes don't take as good a care of them, but I think many of us see that that's true. And do we want to promote that, or do we want to promote more owner-occupied residences in Winooski?
Well, I think as a policy question, we also need to balance that with, do we want to promote affordable housing options too?
Well, the other thing too is you can't really, you can encourage owner occupancy, but you can't really enforce it. Because I buy a house, I can rent it if I want. I can live there if I want. And if I rent the house, there's nothing to stop me from doing that. So it's a very difficult situation to enforce.
Sure.
I
don't think that the legislature put that language in the statute by accident, though.
The concern with upkeep of property, I think that could be better handled through a property maintenance code, where that gets enforced because people see that there's trash on the lawn and it gets dealt with that way rather than through land use regulation.
But to Joe's point, I think there was intention with including that language originally. And it makes sense to have, I think the original idea was for folks who live on their property to be able to have additional folks living in their property, have maybe the additional line of income, but not turning more of our single family homes into rental units, which we have an abundance of rental units and an abundance of affordable housing units in the city. So like, what are we doing to preserve owner occupied units? This is one, enforceable or not. I feel like the intention of this was preservation of owner occupied units.
Yeah, and also if you go to sell that or buy that next property, you're buying it with the understanding that you are going to occupy it and you're going to use that dwelling, the additional dwelling. And if you don't want that, when you go to buy it, you don't buy that property.
Okay.
And again, yeah, there is the enforcement of actually saying that person has to be there, but it's a way of what Abby's point, you know.
Well, then I guess also, to think about what we think about this is, the nuance of what owner means. So if you're doing estate planning and you put your home into a trust and you live there, are you no longer the owner? And therefore you can't have an ADU even though you've been living there for the last 50 years and you have an accessory dwelling on your property. Or if your son or daughter or child moves into the home and it's still in your name, they are not technically the owner on the deed. So do you then have to eliminate the ADU? So, those are some of the things we need to be thinking about as well with the ownership piece of it, because we need to, like I said, we don't currently define what that means to be an owner. So we need to, if we are going to keep the language for requiring owner occupancy, then we're going to need to define what an owner means and then how we regulate that piece as well.
Is this somewhere where the state who's handing down the statute can provide guidance?
I mean, I've looked at some of the I've looked at some of the adjacent municipalities to see if they define owner, and some do and some don't, and it's kind of it's a mixed bag of what they say. Some refer to the person or persons or entity whose name is on the deed. Some talk about how it's reflected in the grand list. So there's various ways to define it. I think it's just, I don't know if there's a standard for what that means. It's just a matter of what we can define and then enforce.
Okay. You raise very excellent points.
So let me just stop us for a second because it's about 8:15. I'm not sure how much more we're going to get through this tonight unless we go till 9 or later. So I'm just wondering if it's appropriate to shut this off now and pick it up at our next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a chance to maybe chew on some of this stuff and read through this again, so that when we come back we can have probably a full meeting. I hate to say it, but I suspect there's going to be quite a bit of discussion about this, the accessory dwelling, the whole legislation and the changes.
Yep, I think that's a good idea. Again, it is a big change, and I don't want to go into this lightly. So it's there's definitely there's arguments on both sides, and I think it's something we need to be able to think about and explore in more detail.
And I think in preparation for the next meeting, we should think about the whole owner occupancy question, and maybe Eric, you can come up with some examples of some definitions or propose a definition if that's asking too much. I don't know.
Nope, that's fine. Yep, I've already started doing some of that.
Okay.
And if you could, Eric, maybe share with us some of the definitions that you found in other communities that are nearby. That would be helpful.
Yep, I'll do that as well. Yep,
Okay.
I can do all that.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay.
So I finally found my agenda. Figure out where to look for it. Department and city updates. Eric, any updates? We'll start with you.
Yeah, a couple things quickly to update you all on. As Terry alluded to at the top of the meeting, the VTCBD Labs LLC operating at 133 Elm Street, they were issued a notice of violation for being out of compliance with our regulations related to performance standards, specifically odor. That was appealed to the Development Review Board. The Development Review Board upheld that notice of violation. And that has subsequently been appealed to the Vermont Superior Court's Environmental Division. So that is an ongoing initiative. We as the city are working to prepare some formal action in the courts as well to begin enforcement of that notice of violation while the appeal plays out. So we are still moving forward from the city's end to ensure that our notice of violation is complied with. So more to come on that. Also, as discussed at the top of the meeting and throughout, the Parks and Open Space Master Plan has been approved by council. So that is, now we are working to implement that. And actually, I am going to be meeting with Ray Coffey, our community services coordinator. Ray Coffey. I'll just go with that. I forget what Ray's officially is, but so I'll just say meeting with Ray, who will be managing the Parks and Open Space Plan. I'm meeting with him, I believe next Friday. We have a meeting set up to go out and actually start collecting some data, doing some GPS tracking on the trail networks, so we can start putting out some of that information, because that was one of the short-term items that was listed in the plan. So already looking at implementation of that document. And the other thing I wanted to update you all on is the parking inventory analysis and management plan that we have funding through the UPWP for. We had a meeting earlier today to start talking about how to kick this off and data collection. So one of the things that I talked about with you all at a previous meeting was providing some assistance if you're interested in that data collection. Basically, what it would involve is you would get a data sheet that has you would log the time of day, the street you're on, and the number of vehicles you see parked between a certain block. And basically that's it. So if you're out going for a walk, and we have specific roads identified where we want to collect the data. So if you're out for a walk and you want to collect the information, that'd be great. The more data we can collect on more throughout the day on various times, and it can be any time throughout the day. Thank you, Paul. Community Services Director, Ray Coffey. Sorry, anytime throughout the day, Are you
saying Paul's sitting in on this meeting?
Paul Sarn is, yes.
Oh, haven't even heard from him today.
He did chime in earlier.
He did.
How's it going?
Hi, Paul.
So I will send out the data the information to all of you tomorrow. So if, like I said, if you're interested in collecting those counts, that'd be great. If not, that's fine too. But the more data points we can get, the better the modeling will be, and the better the product will be at the end of the day. So I will send out some information on that to you all tomorrow.
So one other thing on that, Eric. So they did the South Burlington review as well, the same group. Was it South Burlington they did? Anyway, point of my question is there a report from another city or town that we could read that they've already concluded, so that we kind of have the language in mind of what we're going to be expecting to hear from them?
I think probably the closest would have been for the town of Williston. They did the same outfit. RSG did some work for the town of Williston, I want to say a year or so ago. But I think these studies are pretty specific to each situation. I don't know if there's really kind of a general template that's going to be transferable from one to the next. I mean, I think the methodology might be, but I think as far as what the outcomes are really going to be more specific to each community. So I can share the scope of work with you as well. So what we landed on with the final scope, so you can get a sense of what is going to be, what's going to be prepared. But as far as examples of that, I don't know if there's anything that's really.
I get what Sarah's saying, is that just if we had a similar document before us, so that we could kind of familiarize how to just kind of how to analyze it. Not that we're going to be comparing data or anything like that.
I wonder if the RPC might have something that they could give us a link to.
And probably RSG. I mean, I would just go to their website. They probably have tons of projects listed.
Okay.
I would think.
I think we're all very well aware that Winooski is pretty unique in Chittenden County, and this wouldn't apply. But I agree with Sarah that it would be useful to just have something before us to kind of immerse us a little bit in this before we get.
It's sort of the language. It's really the language.
Yeah. So we're not kind of broadsided by it, and we know how to look at it.
Yeah.
So there was a parking study done for the downtown core by a different entity back in 2016, I believe it was, which is on our website. So that is, I mean, I don't know how comparable the two will be, but there has been a study done for the city previously.
Okay.
In the not too distant past. And that's all I had.
Okay. Mayor Lott, do you have anything you want to add?
In case you missed it, a week or so ago, Vermont Gas Systems announced that they are funding the 10% local match for noise mitigation for at least the kickoff year to get us started, so they're going to do a pilot year to like design the program and what the options are for homes. And then in 22, actual homes in Winooski could start receiving mitigation.
Is that a 80-20?
90-10.
Grant? 90-10. So they're picking up the entire match.
Yes. I don't know for how many years they're committed to, but at least enough to get us off the ground.
Nice.
And actually, just to add on to that, some of the information they were looking for, I provided the consultants with a spreadsheet of all so they provided me a list of all the properties, and I provided them a list of the age of construction on those properties, because that's a kind of a key marker as far as eligibility. So it may not come as a big surprise that the majority of the properties that are in the noise area are pretty old. From most of them are 1900s construction. So like the actual 1900s, not like the century category of 1900. It's 1905, 1900, 1910, a lot of pretty old structures. So I'm sure there's been some upgrades to those buildings in the past 100+ years, but the eligibility requirements are based off of the age of construction as well. So I think for the most part, pretty much everything in the city should qualify.
What does their mitigation entail? Like, what are the improvements that they propose that would?
So I think it's gonna depend on each structure. They're going to do, as I understand it, they'll do an initial analysis to determine what the interior noise levels are. And they're going to base the mitigation off of that, whether that be just insulation, adding additional insulation into the structure, or new windows, or both. I think it's going to depend on the decibel level inside the home versus what the mitigation can accommodate.
And I want to add to that, one of the reasons Vermont Gas Systems is putting the money up is because they're going to marry up their weatherization work so they can, they're jointly doing insulation. They can do other energy efficiency upgrades to help with emissions and like utility costs for these folks.
Yeah, I figured there was a reason why they were partnering on this. I mean, there's a kind of a dual purpose there that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but I bring up the issue because witnessing the proceedings that were the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation's analysis of the historic mansion house on Main Street, their justification for delisting that from the State Historic Register was the only thing that's changed on that building since it was put on the register was the windows. And, if you could say like, oh, I changed the windows to like mitigate the sound of like the F-35s, and there's just things working against one another here. This is another argument of why I think we need our own preservation language, because like you need to be able to like make improvements to your house and still,
be historic.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
We got it. I think I have to get off this meeting now, guys.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Anything else, Mayor?
Nope. Have a good night, everyone.
Okay. Thanks so much.
All right, guys. Good night.
Thanks,
Good night,
Sarah.
Sarah. Any other business?
Well, there was one other item, Mike, that you and I had discussed about our meeting schedule. I don't know if you want to bring that up or.
That was so long ago. I forget about tonight's meeting, for God's sakes.
That's true. So Mike and I discussed when we were setting the agenda for tonight's meeting, we had discussed the potential of going back to 2 meetings a month just to be able to get through some of this work, because it is a lot of, there's a lot to cover. And it seems like some of the discussions are a lot of recap of the previous meetings. We can really dive into a lot of the meat of the new discussions. So we had discussed going back to 2 meetings a month. So wanted to bring that up to kind of get a sense from you all if you're interested in doing that. We wouldn't starting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say we wouldn't start it until January at the earliest, just because of the kind of the holiday schedules in November and December. So that's what we would look at, is probably going back to the obviously we're on the second Thursday, but adding the 4th Thursday back in. I don't know if people's schedules would accommodate that or not, but just, in the short term, that's something that Mike and I had discussed potentially considering, again, just so that we can have more time to try to get through some of this information and not have to extend our meetings into the evenings like we have been the last few meetings.
Well, and also to get things done so we feel like we're accomplishing something, because like you said, Eric, we spend a lot of time, I think, at these meetings, because they're a month apart, going back over things that we talked about the month before. Just be fresher in our minds when we get to it, I think.
And I do feel like just as we get into the meat of the meeting, we're calling it short, and then we're not calling it short, but the meeting, we're over time, and we say, okay, we'll pick up here at the next meeting, but then we have all this other stuff before we can pick it up at the next meeting, and then and so on and so forth. So I think that makes sense. And then as much as we can reduce anything on the agenda before these work items, I think the better. There's obviously a benefit to reviewing the master plan, but every meeting there seems to be something before we get to this technical piece. And I think we're eager to dive in and not have an interrupted conversation on the technical part. So I would support having 2 meetings.
How long would the meetings be?
3 hours each.
At least.
No, hopefully an hour and a half.
Market wants to meet twice a month now too, so I'm like, great.
well, hopefully an hour and a half. 6:30 to 8.
I would say I would be interested if we could keep it to an hour and a half, and maybe if we just did it for 3 months or something, so that we saw that there was a break and what sort of. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
How about if we do this? If everyone's on board, we will have a definite end time of 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, if anyone wants to say time out, it's 8 o'clock. Okay, and we can end, and we can. I wouldn't say let's put a 3-month thing on it, but let's do it. It won't be a permanent thing. Let's see where we are in 3 months and see if we need to keep going 2 meetings a month, or if we can cut back to 1.
Right, revisit it.
Yeah. So maybe that's the thing. We'll revisit it in our second March meeting. Do we need to do 2 meetings in April?
I mean, I would envision having 2 meetings a month as we, mostly just to try to get through the meat of the regulatory updates, and then we can go back to 1 a month, or keep going if you just enjoy getting together twice a month.
Every week, though, I'm like, I can't wait for planning this Thursday. I do like it, but
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds good. We'll plan on having 2 meetings a month starting in January, going forward for some period of time to be determined. Yep. Any other business?
I have nothing else.
Then I'm looking for someone who wants to end this meeting to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Thanks, everyone. Our next meeting is December something. 10th. December 10th?
December 10th.
Okay. We'll see you all then. Thanks very much.
Eric, can I ask you a question?
Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.